So I also watched your film just a few days ago. I was also kind of busy, so I was like, "Can I get a copy?" So I saw that, and it's interesting how the film gave us this realization that colonialism or feudalism never really left the country, even up to it transcends overseas, and how we as Filipinos became commodities, right? We're not seen as some people who are independent, who should be independent and have our own way of driving our economy that that do not objectify us in a way. So now, as Filipino Americans, American filmmakers, I'd like to know how is it like to make films based on your experiences abroad, because here in the Philippines the stories are similar but also kind of different because we grew up here, the reality is different, but at the same time we all are connected through colonialism.
Well, hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It really is such an honor to be at this brand new, wonderful, impressive space and to share this film with you. This is such a love letter to my family. We have 3 of my titas sitting in the audience today. Their first time seeing the film. And it's been our dream to bring this film to the Philippines. So it is really quite special to be here. To answer your question, that's a really tough, ponderous thing to reflect upon. I think, what you're saying is completely valid. Colonialism is a force that has been so pervasive through all of our lives. And me growing up in the United States and then going to school abroad in Europe, and then sometimes coming here, I felt I had a very disjointed sense of identity in regards to being Filipino. And through my art, through my storytelling, I've tried to find a way to feel Filipino enough to educate myself on the history of my family, the history of this country where I belong. And I understand that my sentiments aren't totally unique, that there are Filipinos all over the world that feel the same way. So to answer your question, it is quite challenging to make films and to make projects that you hope will resonate with audiences. And we were really inspired to make Nurse Unseen because, well, initially I wanted to make a film to honor my titas, to honor my tita Dodo, who was kind of our second mom. And I wanted to learn more about them and what inspired them to go into nursing and to leave their home and leave their family and go all the way to the United States and how that affected me. That was the real impetus of the film. But later when we got into COVID and we were hearing reports of how our community was so disproportionately affected by the pandemic, we realized our film had to kind of zoom out, and we had to kind of switch focus and expand the focus to unpack what was happening with our community. And we couldn't do that without looking at the colonial history and all of that. So yeah, it's a hard question to answer, but I really appreciate it, and I'm thankful that you could recognize that that's kind of what we were trying to explore in our work.
I'll add by saying, we just want to say thank you to Sir Joey, to FDCP, to Homer, the team, for inviting us here. I think it's such an honor to be back here. This is actually the second time we're screening Nurse Unseen in the Philippines. So we're very honored that it's in this new beautiful space. Similar to Michelle, who shouted out her family, I wanted to also recognize my cousin, Michelle. You will see her in the poster actually outside in the lobby. So it's a I don't come from a large family of nurses. We have a lot of teachers in our family. So unlike Michelle, when she first approached me about this film, I was like, well, I don't have that many family members who are nurses. And then I came to find out that, Michelle is a nurse. I've got a half Australian, half Filipino cousin who's also a nurse. And to answer your question, as someone who was born in Jensan, but who grew up in Sydney, Australia, I did a year of exchange at Ateneo in 2006. And through that experience, I met someone who actually introduced me to Michelle. So this collaboration would not have existed had it not been for that year of exchange at Ateneo. And then I moved to the US in 2013, so just over 13 years now. So my experience has definitely been of that. What you describe in terms of it's a very global experience, but it's always been connected by this idea of like a connection to the Philippines and questioning who you are as a person, as a Filipino, as an Australian, as an American, as a global citizen. And I guess to answer your question, I love being able to quote Olivia Rodrigo, shout out to her. But in one of her songs, she says, who am I if not exploited? And I think there's always that element of exploitation, and someone has to be exploited in order for, companies and other organizations to make profit, right? And I'm really grateful that Michelle and I can collaborate on projects like Happy Jail, Nurse Unseen, and actually our next project is about Jollibee. And we're wanting to, explore that idea of like Filipinos are incredible, right? Here in the Philippines, in the United States, in Australia, around the world. And there's always that tension of like our history with our reality today.
Just to piggyback on your answer, it is complicated. Colonialism and all these forces is a really complicated thing. But we wanted to make this film really to, of course, shine a light on some of these issues, but to make people beyond the Filipino and Filipino American community understand that we're more than our labor, that we are really nuanced, complex human beings that have such a complex, layered history, that have obligations and challenges and joy. And that's really what we hoped to do with Nurse Unseen. Just bring a real humanistic portrait of these unheralded heroes, as Direct Joey referenced the nurses.
The production happened during the pandemic, and I imagine that it was challenging for you guys to shoot it as well, and everyone grieving, and even in the Filipino American community, everybody was grieving. So how was it like during production? Like even you yourself as the director was also grieving while shooting it. It must be difficult.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Like so many of us, we're on lockdown and just feeling fearful, anxious, frustrated, but also wanting to do something to help, to contribute. And while we were hearing these reports, for example, the National Nurses United study that came out that really outlined just how affected our specific community was, to the virus, that was really the impetus for us to really go into production. And so we were waiting anxiously for the vaccines to come out so that we could go back out into the field and really make this story. We just felt it was so urgent that the world needed to know that so many of our titas were coming out of retirement to help on the front lines, or they were dying because they were already, working tirelessly to care for us. So we just really wanted to help. That was the drive, but it was extremely difficult. We couldn't travel with the same amount of freedom that we usually do. We really had to be mindful about the safety of our subjects, of our team. But I think we were successful in doing that, and we were just really mindful about all the precautions, had our PPE, we're all vaccinated, and we just kind of rushed into the field to make this film happen. Now, 6 years after the start of the pandemic, we see the film a little bit differently. In 2021, after being vaccinated and filming, it was about this sense of urgency. Oh, the world really needs to know what is happening to our Filipino nurses. But now I feel the film is just as relevant, but in a different way. It's more about connection and healing and sharing with the world what we really contribute, our nurses, our community, what we really contribute. And watching it back, I'm really proud that it really is such a raw, genuine portrayal of what was happening at that time, because we really were filming 2021. We were watching all of these stories unfold, the resurgence of anti-Asian hate. That wasn't something that we scripted. We just saw it unfold and knew that was playing into the context of what was happening. So we had to also portray that as well. So it really is just this true historical document of the modern history of COVID. And another thing that we're also quite proud of in a bittersweet way is that a lot of our healthcare workers watch this film and for the first time are able to reflect upon the experiences of going through COVID.
Sorry, Kim. I'll just add that, in addition to what Michelle was saying about we were only able to start filming in April of 2021, it also took us a really long time to get the film out into the world. So we were aiming to, film. Michelle was editing. Our composer, Nathan Matthew David, was composing music. We wanted to submit it to film festivals starting September of 2021. So we were doing all of these things in the space of 6 months, for example. But we actually had an extra year that Michelle was able to work on the edit and really fine-tune it. And we only world premiered in 2023. So it took us 2 years actually to film and edit and get it out on the film festival circuit. But we knew that we had something special in that, we were winning audience awards at Asian American film festivals. And then, we did community screenings in 2024 and 2025. You would have seen there, Joe Coy came on as an executive producer because he learned of the film. We had to license that clip of his stand-up segment, and he was saying, I really want to support this project because he was and continues to send nieces and nephews to nursing school, right, in the United States. So he's putting his money where his mouth is and has been a really big supporter of the film. But to answer your question about the challenges, funding was very difficult for us, right? We launched a Kickstarter campaign in May of 2021 to get us through production. But then we also had to raise additional funds in March of 2023, just before the world premiere, to get us to the world premiere. So even though we know that this is a very important film, it still continues to be a struggle to get the word out there, to get the film to more audiences, even though we're very grateful for the invitations, such as the one from FDCP. UP Manila was also where we screened last month. And now we're trying to get the film, on a platform where hopefully more people will be able to watch it here in the Philippines, around the United States, hopefully back in Australia, in the UK where May Parsons is located, because we know that so many people would get a lot out of the film. Not just Filipinos or not just nurses, but I think immigrants, right? People who live and work outside of their home countries, who are seeking a better future for their families, for themselves. I think there's something for everyone in Nurse Unseen.
I did notice, I also like how you've incorporated B-rolls of media references of, let's say, Jokoy. And you also mentioned there, the subjects also mentioned there how we have so many Filipina nurses. And being a nurse is already a gendered occupation, right? But we have so many Filipina nurses in the US. But in Grey's Anatomy, But in shows in the US, they don't have much Filipinas there. Or sometimes if there were some, they were just in the background. So I actually took note of a question here specifically for that. Okay, so nursing is a feminized labor. So how does the film connect colonial history with the gendered expectation that Filipinos are hospitable or naturally caring?
Well, fun fact, and I learned this from Dr. Catherine Sinisa Choi, who is the professor that we speak with frequently throughout the film. She said that initially nursing was not a gendered profession here in the Philippines, that a lot of men were nurses, and it was, I think it was Spain that changed that, and the United States also, because for them, nursing was women's work. So that was a colonial influence that I didn't realize until she taught me that. Yeah.
And to your point about media and representation or lack thereof of Filipino nurses, Michelle and I joke that like we can't claim that the writer's room of The Pit watched Nurse Unseen and put 2 Filipino nurses in the cast. Yeah. But we can't say that they didn't, right? So there's a correlation, if not causation there in that, in the opening scenes of The Pit, season 1, there are 2 Filipino nurses speaking Tagalog. And you're like, this is incredible from what we were seeing 10, 15, 20 years ago to an Emmy award-winning series, right, with Noah Wiley, and season 2 just dropped. So we're very grateful that there's more representation that has been lacking.
Wow, thank you for that. I was meaning to watch The Pit, and now you just Filipino baited me there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's a question here that I also want to know from you guys. In a film about being unseen and unheard, how did you use the sound or silence to emphasize the isolation these nurses felt during the peak of the pandemic?
Again, an excellent question. How did we use the sound to specify that or to illustrate that? Well, we were blessed with really great collaborators, Nathan, Matthew, David, who Carlo referenced, who's an amazing Filipino American composer. We had several sound mixers on the West Coast and the East Coast who helped. I think they were really helpful in pointing out that maybe sometimes the lack of music or the lack of sound would be more dramatic sometimes. So curating the space and the sonic space in that sense was quite poetic, and to your point, would help kind of illustrate both the isolation a lot of the world felt during the pandemic, when things like the New York City cityscape was so strangely quiet and still. That was something that we could drive home through the sound design or lack of music in some points. But yeah, I guess I didn't really think about that super intentionally. It just felt like some organic choices that just felt instinctually right. Is there any other points?
I think I would just add that, Michelle as the editor and Nathan as the composer, they tried to incorporate sounds from the hospital as well. So like the ventilators, the breathing, inhales, exhales, that is also featured in the score and the soundtrack. So I think we tried to make it as Michelle mentioned, real and raw as possible. That a lot of us weren't able to be in the hospitals during that time, right? Because they were a no-go zone. So we tried to transport people into the hospitals as they're watching the film. And we have had nurses who were on the front lines, when they see Nurse Unseen, they're like, that was the first time that I've given myself or have had the opportunity to reflect on what I experienced during the pandemic, because they just needed to get through it, right? So a lot of them didn't even stop. They didn't give themselves that chance. And watching Nurse Unseen gives them the opportunity to just say like, wow, we did go through a lot and there's still a lot that we need to unpack. So we try not we didn't want it to be triggering in any way, but we also wanted it to be as, truthful and real to the experience.
Yeah, there's one point in the film where Nurse Wilma from New York talks about a really scary moment that would happen every now and again during the peak of the pandemic, when it would be so noisy and you would hear patients coding, and then all of a sudden that sound would stop, and it was very eerie because that meant, that these patients were dying. So that was when she shared that with us, it was certainly a really vulnerable recollection, and one that we definitely wanted to keep in the film because it was really authentic to her experience and experiences of many nurses, like in ICUs and emergency rooms.
Right. You're also sorry. You were also the one who edited your film.
Yes, but I also have a really great assistant editor, and we've worked on several projects together. So we have a really good collaboration. So I don't edit alone, but I am a little bit of a control freak, and I really like being able to have that time with the footage outside of the field to really sit down with it and really study what we've collected as a team.
Yeah, because I really like the perfect balance of, yes, we're grieving, but let's also celebrate the lives who also survived during the pandemic, our titas, our mothers. Tapos, ang cute din na nasa pool si tita. My favorite scene. I really love that. Yes, it is a documentary, and I think it is normal to have a post-production timeline that's really long because you have an outline before you shoot, right? And then you rewrite during
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Oh no! Can you tell us more about that? What was your process before filming?
Well, no, it's funny. In this case, yes, we would have, a very loose outline. We definitely wanted to tell the story of the Filipino American nurse experience from many different voices, from many different generations, starting from, the American colonial influences all the way to the modern day of COVID. So we would have those beats mapped out. But, a documentary, you're working with real life, with real people and their real life experiences. So, you definitely don't want to impose too much, and you want to leave room for surprises and lovely revelations to come out. So yes, loose outline, but quickly, we're talking about Nurse Unseen, but in our other project, Happy Jail, that we were filming about the dancing inmates in Cebu, we would often outline how we thought the day would work out, and then it would go completely like 180, and everything else all our plans would fly out the window. So we knew from that project that as like documentarians interested in capturing like truth, or as much of the truth as we can, we had to be really flexible and just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, because filming a documentary can also challenge your initial belief of a certain topic.
True.
So, I also like this question. I'm just picking out questions from this selection. So documentaries often evolve in the editing room. What is one story you're seeing that you had to leave on the cutting room floor that still haunts you or stays with you today?
While Michelle thinks, I think this is appropriate to raise. Like, we joke when we get this question during the Q&A that Michelle has a 6-hour version of Nurse Unseen. And like in the Philippines, like I love Diaz's film, right? We're like, yeah, 6 hours, this would be great. But a lot of people are saying we need to cut it down. And so the current runtime is 93 minutes. And, there were a lot of stories that we could not include. But what we were able to do was work with the Philippine Nurses Association of America, PNAA, to gauge like who should we talk to, who are the people that they would recommend Michelle and I talked to. We did pre-Zoom interviews because it was the pandemic. And so we were able to cast the people you see in the film, but we still get questions like, oh, why didn't you interview people in the Midwest? Why didn't you interview people overseas? Why not, nurses in the Philippines? And we just couldn't fit all of those stories into a 93-minute film. So, of course, there were a lot of stories that we had to prioritize and others that we had to leave off. But
No, that's essentially what I was going to say. I mean, what I learned going through this process is that nursing is such a diverse profession. There's so much to being a nurse, as my titas know. You could be at the bedside in critical care. You can be in leadership and admin. There's also respiratory therapists or nurse. I can't even pronounce what Alexis is. Informaticists. Yes. There's so many experiences within the umbrella of being a nurse. So while this film really focuses on critical care nursing and bedside nursing in relation to the pandemic, there really are so many beautiful, important, impactful stories that still need to be told. And we do know that at least in the United States, this is the first feature-length film that really looks at the nursing experience. But we do hope that there'll be other stories that come out after.
A 6-hour director's cut. So that means this one question is not enough within an hour of answering. There were a lot of scenes then that really resonated or stayed with you. Yeah. Lots.
Yeah, lots.
Okay, I have a special question because you had screenings abroad, not just in the Philippines, like even in Europe, in the US. How do you think these Western audiences interpret these stories differently from the Filipino audience, especially in terms of complicity and benefit? Sorry pang Miss Universe yung mga tanong.
So we screened a lot throughout the United States, and even within the United States, each audience is different. So when we share it with nurses and healthcare workers specifically, there's a different feel, a different energy in the room. They're nodding or, audibly responding to different things. When we're screening it with Filipino or Filipino American community groups in the United States, different things that they react to. And then again, to your question, internationally, some things like people just don't know about. So it's been a really educational experience to understand what audiences are responding to. But I think it's just really important that people beyond our Filipino American community, the Filipino nursing community, get to know about this important story of Nurse Unseen. But we did screen it in London, which was a beautiful experience, and we screened it with May Parsons, the first Filipina, or the first nurse who administered the first COVID vaccine. That was just such a special experience. We shared it in Amsterdam. We really are hoping to share it more in the Philippines and to go to the Middle East. We've shared it in Canada. Those have been really impactful screenings as well. It's just different across the board, but it's really about spreading the story of what our community and our nurse community, what they contribute to the world.
As you would have seen, it's a cornucopia of different topics, different themes, and I think you can get a lot from Nurse Unseen. We were being viewed as like a COVID film, right? And a lot of the film festivals were saying, what you'll have done is great, but we can't program it because people are experiencing COVID fatigue. And so when we pivoted and said, actually, we look at the history of why there are so many Filipino nurses in the United States, then people started to think about it differently. And October is Filipino American History Month, so we get a lot of requests during that month to screen the films at colleges, schools of nursing, at businesses who have Asian American or Filipino employee resource groups, things like that. But I also wanted to say that something that has come out of the film is a discussion about mental health And last year, I had the opportunity to put together like an impact campaign that focuses on mental health and the mental health care of nurses. And I think that's really important because even someone like Dr. Kevin Nadal says there's still a stigma, especially among Filipino Americans or Filipino families, about mental health and talking about mental health issues. And we're hoping that a film like Nurse Unseen can help facilitate even just the start of the conversation of like, we have gone through a global pandemic. We have suffered so much loss. We haven't grieved as a community as much as we would have liked to during the last 5 years. There is a need to talk about our mental health. And so we're hoping that a film like Nurse Unseen can unlock just some of those challenges of being able to talk about how we need to talk to other people, and we need the chance to grieve. It's not okay just to be like, just go to church, pray, you'll be fine. Like you can do that, and that's important. But in addition to that, that there should be some aspect of talking through mental health issues.
Right, because the pandemic really triggered a lot of issues within ourselves. Let's open the floor for a Q&A. Okay, there's one. Anyone? Ako ulit magtatanong.
Sure.
Hi. It's my aunt.
Hi, tita.
Did you like it?
I did. I just want to add something. I was in the States for like almost 26 or 28 years, and I worked in the operating room every day, and I see the part Nurse Unseen. And I just want to let everybody in the audience know that if you are nurses or nursing students and you feel like you're not seen, I first-hand knowledge, I want you to know that almost all the doctors in the operating room love to have Filipino nurses in their operating rooms. They may not say it outright, but they always request for Filipinos. And I, for one, worked in one operating room only because you rotate. So you get requests that, doctor, can you do my case? But together with me, they will always ask for a team. And the team would be mostly, or 99% Filipinos. That means they trust the Filipino nurse, but they cannot come outright and say, give me this Filipino. No, they cannot, because that would be like siding. The others would not feel good about that. And so go there, experience it, and work, and you'll find out that they will love you, but they cannot say it outright. So you won't be unseen, you will be seen, but I don't know how much you will be appreciated officially. So this is not just because of the pandemic, this is because of how you were trained and how your work ethics are. So be proud.
Kahit reaction, ganon. Like, how did the film resonate with you? Yes? Oh, there we go.
So, ayun, good day sa lahat. Medyo nahiya po. Naiintindihan ko. Medyo kabado. Yung pinanood po natin, Nurse Unseen, so, tumatak po sa akin doon yung, as Filipinos po, yung culture po natin na caring, no, yung mga sa babae po. And as the film goes po, I feel bit emotional po dun sa mga nag-pass away due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And natawa rin po dun sa scene na may nag-curse word po. And I love po yung pinaka-reaction. And as you mentioned po, sir, kanina po and ma'am, yung next project niyo po is about Jollibee. And may gusto lang po sana akong i-emphasize about sa Jollibee. Kasi as a son po ng mama ko, as a son po ng janitress ng Jollibee, and di po sila masyadong parang nakikita. Sila po kasi yung parang janitress. Di po sila pares ng suot ng Jollibee. And yon, pag nagkikwento po sa inyo mama ko, pag nauwi, para po siyang tinuturing na nanay ng mga student, working student na mga bata. Parang nanay-nanayan po yung mama ko. And ayun lang po yung parang gusto kong kung ma-add po dun sa film niyo po.
No, I get that. Kasi
Thank you po.
may labor issues ang Jollibee dito.
Yes. Thank you po.
Thank you.
Ibang
Thank you for
topic.
sharing that. And I think, as you will see in Michelle's films, right, there's always like it always centers the family, the personal experience. So to your point, right, like it's not just looking at how Jollibee is expanding, right, across the globe, which is incredible, and they're celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2028. But we want to tell the story of, the innovation of the Filipinos, how hardworking they are, but ultimately, it comes back to that sense of family, and that sense of community, like as you were saying, right, like leading and helping others, right? In that sense, as opposed to it just being about the bottom line and about the money, right? There's definitely that sense of family, a sense of community, and I think that's something that resonates and is consistent in all of Michelle's work. From like Matt Shepard is a friend of mine, to Happy Jail, to Nurse Unseen, even Food Roots, which is another documentary that Michelle worked on about a restaurateur called Billy Deck. So we will definitely keep that in mind in terms of, when we're looking at something as large as Jollibee, we want to get to the heart of why it has been so successful, right? This Filipino brand that's now around the world, right? It's a global brand, global community. Yeah, but thank you for the advice. Thank you for the request. Appreciate it.
Hello, Shell and Carlo.
Hi, Dar.
Yeah, just really quick. Let me just appreciate you guys for doing this very incisive and inspiring work of art, and I really feel that like all of the nurses around the world, not just Filipinos, should actually see this. To kind of like have a sense of pride over their work. Just curious because I saw the UK clip, and we are known to be exporters of nurses all around the world, and I get the just being very, how do you say it, being very strategic about Filipino Americans. So because that's where you're based, are you seeing a potential maybe like expansion, a companion piece of this, maybe near the future where there could be OFWs or nurses in other parts of the world? Because I'm sure there are a lot. I also come from a family of nurses and lawyers. So, that would be, because I'm sure in the UAE or in other parts of the world, they would have different, layers of challenges, but again, because they're Filipinos, the nurturing, the caring aspect of their work really comes into the front line. And so, I just wanted to understand if you have, while making this film, you've come across like, hey, in this part of the continent, it'd be really interesting to do a potential documentary, maybe on not just nurses, but maybe other aspects of, OFWs in general.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yes, absolutely. There's just so much potential here in terms of storytelling, and Filipinos are everywhere. Filipino nurses are everywhere. So there's definitely that potential to expand the storytelling. we'll be working on a smaller project with nurses based in the Pacific Northwest and telling their stories. So we're going to continue doing this and hope we can expand our focus beyond the States and look to places like the Middle East, like Australia, where Carlo's from. But in addition to that, we've also been talking about Filipino teachers, which similarly have a similar story in terms of being exported to places where there are teaching shortages. That's something we've discussed. There's never a shortage of important, impactful, historically unseen stories that need to be told. So I feel like, God willing, we'll be making films for a while. Yeah.
And thank you, Darlene, for the question. Darlene and I actually collaborated on Isabel Sandoval's Lingua Franca. So I'm really grateful that you could be here, Darlene. As a producer, you understand the challenges of getting these films and projects on a platform or out into the world. And so I think that is always on our minds in terms of how best to choose and select our next project. So we have received this request as well. What about other nursing communities from different parts of the world? And as much as, Michele and I would love to be able to tell all of the different stories of nurses around the world, we're hoping that this is our contribution and that other filmmakers from those communities can take up the mantle and say, okay, I want to tell the story of nurses from, and then insert whichever country or community, because I don't think we could do it ourselves. This was definitely something about the Filipino nurses specifically, because we're both Filipino. But that's not to say that there are other very specific stories from other cultural groups and communities. They're as important, equally important. There are just other stories that I think Michele and I are prioritizing when we're working on, documentary projects. Shout out to FDCP because we told them, we'd really like to meet with someone at Netflix Philippines, and they put us in touch with someone at Netflix Philippines, because how amazing would it be to have Nurse Unseen on Netflix Philippines, if not on Netflix Global around the world, right? As many of you will know, there are challenges in the United States at the moment with funding, and we had hoped to put Nurse Unseen on public broadcast, so it would be available to the broader community for free. But due to funding cuts and challenges and closures of certain PBS strands, we don't know what the future of Nurse Unseen will be in the United States. But we are trying to, turn over every rock and explore every avenue so that we can share this film with as many people as possible.
That is true, that a film can also inspire other filmmakers who want to tell those specific stories. It's like with Sunday Beauty Queen, right? The domestic helpers Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong. Okay, we have 2 questions left. Okay, we have one. Siya po yung una. Sorry. And then you next. Wow.
Ayan. Good afternoon po, Miss Michele and Sir. Just for your information po, I am not an aspiring nurse, but rather I am an aspiring teacher. And I feel like there is some part of culture of being a nurse and a teacher with the term being unseen, since if we're going to contextualize it here in the Philippines, we are often underappreciated and underestimated. So this question stems from my experiences between my peers. So I have a lot of friends who are aspiring nurses. And often, more than not, they would usually tell me na, okay, after I graduate, I want to go abroad, since here in the Philippines, it's truly underfund, underpaid, yung mga nurses here overwork with little to no pay. So my question here is, in the context here in the Philippines, what do you hope this message tells to the government, to the lawmakers, and to the general public? What key message do you want them to see and to hear from this movie? Especially knowing the nature of the nurses here in the Philippines.
Thank you for sharing and for that question. When we were sharing the film last month at UP College of Nursing, our audience was predominantly future nurses, and I think showing the film to them was a real educational experience because a lot of them, like your friends, were really aspiring to go abroad, make much more money than they would if they stayed here in this country. I think what this film can do is share how that experience going abroad, while financially could be helpful in providing a certain amount of stability, there are other challenges that they may not be aware of. The film talks about systemic racism, talks about challenges that you may not experience if you stay here in this country. So it's not all milk and honey when you go overseas. There are nurses. When I shared this film just two weeks ago in Houston, they were not shy. They all wanted to share about their challenges at work, in the hospital, with certain coworkers who either underestimated them or just were blatantly racist towards them. Those are experiences that your friends and other nurses here might not know they could possibly encounter in the United States, but they're very real. In our country, like many countries, it's a very politically, socially volatile time where immigrants aren't really looked at in a positive way. So also we're hoping that this film can change that conversation, help people understand that immigrants are what really make the United States, other countries really great, and we really contribute so much to the fabric of society. So that's something else that we hope Nurse Unseen promotes.
And shout out to teachers, right? I was just going to add that one of the nurses in New York, she watched the film and afterwards she said, Carlo, please thank Michelle, thank your team for putting this film together, because you not only tell the story of Filipino nurses, but you empower nurses to speak up, to stand up. And to answer your question, that's what we're hoping that Nurse Unseen is able to do, not only for nurses, nursing students, but also for teachers and everyone, right? To sort of say, when there's an issue, you have to speak up. You don't know what results, will arise, but if you see an issue, you have to say something, right? And we're hoping that a film like Nurse Unseen will empower more people to say, I do need to speak up, because if I don't, we can see what happens, right? The alternative. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of empowering people to speak up.
Thank you po. Sorry po, medyo nanginginig po kasi ang lamig.
Ako rin.
The film po ended with makibaka nga po, activism. And since one of the aspects of the film po was to let Filipino nurses be known po, ang great touch lang po niya, more on comment po kasi sorry po. Ang great touch po niya sa activism kasi nga po, ang mga Filipinos po ay still really close-minded nga po about activism. Yet parang first option po palagi sa pag nag-anak nga po is maging nursing student kaagad. Kaya yun po, I hope po magkaroon po nga ng marami po makanood po ng pelikula po dito sa Pilipinas po mismo para nga po magkaroon nga po ng pagtutugma po sa mga Pilipino magagawa po natin, pati nga po sa aktivismo, pati po sa pag-speak up po sa mga issue. Yun lang po.
Salamat.
Congratulations po.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. And thank you so much, Michelle and Carlo. Napakaganda ng pelikula nyo. At for sure, marami siyang ma-inspire na mga tao na mag-speak up at makibaka. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you.